this flows on to this next part, which is changes to workers' compensation. So what's essentially occurred in relation to this is that if you work in one of these industries that's listed on the page there, and if you contract COVID-19, sorry about that, I'll read them out. So the retail industry, the healthcare sector, police and emergency services, firefighters, ambulance officers, educational institutions, the cleaning industry, the construction industry, restaurants, clubs and hotels, disability and aged care facilities, refuges, halfway houses and shelters, passenger transport services, courts and tribunals, correctional or detention centres, places of public entertainment or instruction. So if you work in any of those industries, if you contract COVID-19, the presumption for the purposes of workers' comp is that you have contracted it at work. The interesting thing about this is that they say on one hand, the presumption is that if you contracted in these industries, you've contracted it at work. But if you look at the very low number of cases we have in Australia, and almost, you've got to say at least 90% of the time, they're able to contract trace where it came from, then in actual fact, the contract tracing will confirm whether you've contracted it at work or not. It's only going to be the 10%. It's only going to be the 10% where it's unknown that this will come into play, really, because if it's unsure, then it will be deemed that you've contracted it at work. But this is probably more of a phenomenon if you had sort of what Victoria had last year, 700 cases a day, where they might know where 600 are from, but the other 100 might be, because there's so many at once, you don't know where the other 100 have come from, or it's under investigation. But when you've got small numbers, I think certainly those who've been following the news in the past couple of months, because there's been so few cases, they've almost been able to pinpoint exactly every single case and where it's come from. So again, this has some basis because yes, there's a presumption you've contracted at work in these industries, but then again, that's kind of countered by the contract tracing, which is likely to give you an affirmative on this anyway. So if you contracted this at a part, let's say you were in the healthcare sector, but the contract tracing said you contracted it at at a McDonald's on a Sunday, well then obviously it's not a workers' comp situation in that scenario. Yes, sir. Well, potentially, yes, because if you look at workers' compensation and how workers' compensation typically works, okay? The thing about COVID-19 is that where it's different from other, I guess, illnesses and injuries is that with COVID-19, there seems to be a result sooner rather than later. You either recover or you die, basically. So that's kind of how it works, is that if you die from it, and if it's deemed you've contracted it at work, it'd be very interesting to see how that, obviously I don't wish that on anyone, but it'd be very interesting to see how they treat that, whether there's any employer liability in those situations. Typically you've got, whether there's even I think it'd be very difficult for Safe Work to try and prosecute those sort of situations, but theoretically, if you think about it, on a construction site, if someone falls through a scaffold and dies or something like that, that could potentially have the ability to have fines and penalties, whether or not that goes through a workers' comp process or not. And the reason I mentioned the recover or die before I mentioned that for a reason, and it's because where I think COVID's different from other sort of illnesses is that there seems to be some cases where there's an ongoing lasting effect of the disease. So they're the ones that are likely to get. If you think about a back injury, for a moment. If you've got a back injury, a person has a back injury at work, they might have treatment, they might have surgery, but a lot of back injuries that people have at work, they may not recover from. So what that leads to is some sort of whole person impairment claim, of where they may receive a lump sum payment for some sort of loss of that body part or movement of that body part. It may also lead to a negligence claim as part of the workers' comp process as well. I think that that's less likely in a COVID-19 scenario, because in a COVID-19 scenario, more often than not, you recover or you die. That's the situation. So this is at the moment, New South Wales Workers' Comp, if you contract in these areas, the presumption is if you contracted at work. So this is more about how they're treating particular types of claims. So we don't have any stats yet on how many of these have been made, how many have progressed to long-term liability, because that's another very interesting thing, is it really, and what we'll probably see hopefully in the near future, is numbers around how many of these cases of COVID-19 that were workers' comp based have gone on beyond a normal flu recovery time. Have gone on beyond two to 4 weeks. I've actually had 2 clients that have had it in the last year, and both have said to me, one said to me, like she recovered in 2 weeks. The other said that he recovered in about a week. So it'd be interesting to see that the exact scenario you've said, the one with the lasting effects, if there is a lasting respiratory problem, well, could that lead to a WPI claim? Could that lead to some sort of, lump sum payment type situation? Could that lead to a negligence situation? Because it's at that point when there's employer kind of risk, if you like. The flip side, as Andrew alluded to, is jumping the gun on vaccinations. If there's a side effect of that, then what does that expose? Well, look, I don't think it's done a lot to premiums, to be honest, because I think that the number of people that will have claimed COVID for workers' comp will probably be few and far between. But obviously for any organisation that's got a premium of above 30K, then obviously you're in that employer rated bucket, and in which case it may very well, obviously a case that does go beyond that. There could be an industry adjustment on that basis. I mean, the actuarians may very well adjust the industry scenario based on that. I don't think if they did, it wouldn't be that great, because again, I think that look in Australia is the very low case numbers. Yeah. The 2 things I'm very interested to see at the end of this is, one, have we had any COVID-19 cases where an employee has had long-lasting effects and may very well legitimately tries to seek compensatory things for that, and whether anyone who's vaccinated has the same situation, whether they've had any lasting effects of that situation. The other factor here, and this is something to not discount, and because we see this in so many other injury claims, is that whether a COVID-19 situation, like any other injuries, may lead to a sort of a bolt-on mental health claim. We see this all the time, and I was just doing a presentation on this actually, a webinar with my clients and associates earlier this week, that mental health now is the highest number of median, let me start again. Mental health, highest average of lost time in weeks per claim. So 21 weeks in New South Wales now, and that's higher than even back injuries. That's correct. Higher than back and all of the other injuries you can possibly think of that can happen at work. Mental health is now the highest, 21 weeks of average lost time per claim. So that's the average. That's 5 months on average that the average mental health workers' comp claim will go for. And we're just seeing them. There's a whole probably another, there's a whole another conversation about New South Wales workers' comp that I'll hold my tongue on that today. But basically, you're seeing pretty significant mental health claims and on the rise as well. So